I can't keep pretending I don't. His voice cracked just enough for me to notice, and for a second, I thought he might turn around, walk away, and pretend this never happened. The city hummed quietly around us, the distant whoosh of a passing car, the muted thump of bass from some apartment window half a block away, the way rain dripped from a rusted fire escape onto the pavement beside us. It all felt far away, like we were standing in a bubble where time had slowed down just for us. He didn't finish his sentence, and I didn't ask him to. We just stood there, his eyes locked on mine, his expression somewhere between resolve and fear. I wanted to say something, joke about how dramatic he was being, or ask him if he'd finally lost it, but none of that felt right. Not when my chest felt tight and my skin was buzzing, like my body had figured out something before my mind did. Noah looked away first, shoved his hands back into his hoodie pockets, like he needed to hide them before they did something reckless. "Forget it," he muttered. But I couldn't. We started walking again, slower this time. The street curved, leading us toward the East River. Somewhere in the distance, I could hear the low wail of a tugboat horn. It was so quiet between us that every sound felt amplified. The splash of our shoes in shallow puddles, the occasional gust of wind rattling loose signs, even a quiet rasp of his breath. I kept replaying it in my head, that almost sentence. I can't keep pretending I don't what? Like me? Need me? Want me? The thought made my stomach flip in a way I wasn't ready to admit meant anything. We passed a bodega with its lights still on, the scent of warm bread drifting out into the cold. Noah slowed, glanced at it, but didn't stop. Instead, he said quietly, "Do you ever think about how we ended up here?" I laughed, because it sounded like the start of some philosophical debate we'd have after too many drinks. Here as in walking in the rain at midnight, or here as in life? He gave a faint smile. Both. I shrugged. We met because I spilled beer on you at that party, remember? I think fate's been regretting it ever since. He chuckled, a low, warm sound that made something in my chest loosen. But then his smile faded, and he said, "No, I mean, here, us, after everything." I looked at him, but he was staring straight ahead, jaw set like he'd just said too much. The truth was, I had thought about it a lot, but every time I'd shoved it aside because he'd always said I was like a brother, and you just don't go there. We reached the waterfront. The black water reflected the city lights in jagged, broken lines. A cold breeze came off the river, carrying that damn metallic scent I've only ever smelled in New York. We stood at the railing, side by side. I could feel the heat from his arm through my jacket. Even though we weren't touching, the air between us felt charged, like if I reached out, I might get burned. "Noah," I started, but my voice caught. I tried again. "If you got something to say, maybe just say it." He exhaled, his breath clouding in the air. "I don't want to screw this up," he said quietly. "I don't even know if I'm reading this right." My heartbeat thudded in my ears. Reading what right? He turned then, actually turned to face me, and there it was, that look again. The one that didn't match the whole like a brother thing. "Adam!" His voice was low, almost a whisper. "This thing between us, it's not the same anymore. I don't see you the same." The words landed somewhere deep, unsettling everything I thought I knew. I wanted to laugh it off, make a joke, pretend I hadn't heard, but I couldn't, because the truth was, I hadn't been seeing him the same either. Not for a while. He took a step closer, just one, and the air between us seemed to shrink to nothing. I could smell the faint scent of rain in his hoodie, the soap he always used, something warmer underneath. He looked at me like he was giving me the chance to back away. I didn't. "Say something," he murmured. I could feel my pulse in my throat. "I don't think I can," I said, and it was the most honest thing I'd said all night. For a moment, we just stood there, our breath clouding the cold air, neither of us moving. And then, barely, almost imperceptibly, his hand brushed mine on the railing. It lingered, not an accident. That single touch sent something through me I couldn't name, but I knew nothing was the same anymore. If you're feeling this moment, subscribe, like, share, and tell me in the comments, If someone you thought you knew completely looked at you like that, what would you do? His hand stayed there, just lightly, just enough to feel against mine on the cold metal railing. It was nothing. It was everything. The sound of the river seemed louder now, the faint ripples slapping against the pier in uneven rhythms. A ferry passed in the distance, lit up against the darkness, carrying strangers to places I couldn't think about. I didn't move my hand away, and neither did he. I kept my eyes on the water, afraid that if I looked at him, I wouldn't be able to keep whatever this was from breaking open, because the truth was, I'd thought about this before. Not like this. Not standing here with the rain clinging to us and the city breathing around us, but in those quiet moments I never admitted to. Moments where I caught myself watching him laugh a little too long, wondering what it would be like to close that space between us. He shifted slightly, leaning his forearms on the railing now, so our hands were side by side instead of touching. But the warmth of that brief contact still buzzed in my skin. "You remember that night after my birthday?" He asked suddenly, his voice low. It took me a second to catch up. "Which year?" "The year we ended up at Coney Island at 2 a.m. I let out a small laugh. "When you insisted on getting into the ocean fully clothed in November." "Yeah, I remember." He smiled, but it faded quickly. "I think about that night sometimes," he said. And when I glanced at him, his eyes weren't on the water anymore. They were on me. The breeze picked up, carrying a mix of salt and city grit. There was something in his gaze I couldn't read, a mix of nostalgia, longing, and something heavier, like regret. Before I could say anything, a couple walked past us on the pier, their laughter loud in the quiet. Noah stepped a little closer to me, without seeming to notice, or maybe he did. The couple disappeared into the darkness, their voices fading, and the space between us was gone again. I turned toward him. It felt like we'd been circling something for years without naming it, keeping it tucked away in the never-going-to-happen corner of our friendship. But tonight, that corner didn't seem so far anymore. "Noah," my voice came out rougher than I intended. He tilted his head, waiting. "What are we doing?" I asked. It was the wrong question, or maybe the only one that mattered. He gave a half-smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I don't know. I can't shake this feeling lately." "What feeling?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked down at his hands on a railing, then back up at me, like maybe I'd been lying to myself about what this is. The words hung there between us, heavy and electric. I wanted to ask what this meant, but I already knew, or maybe I was just too afraid to hear him say it. He looked like he was about to add something else when his phone buzzed in his pocket. The sound broke the moment like glass. He sighed, pulled it out, glanced at the screen, and slipped it back without answering. I didn't ask who it was. I didn't want to know. Instead, I stepped back, leaning against the railing. My pulse was still fast, my palms a little damp, and it wasn't from the rain. He mirrored me, leaning too, but turned his head so he could watch my face. It made me nervous. It made me want to look back. "You okay?" he asked softly. I nodded too quickly. "Yeah, just processing." Noah gave a small nod, like he understood, but the way he was looking at me, it felt like he was waiting for me to give him permission to cross a line. I didn't give it. Not yet. We stayed like that for another minute. The city behind us, the water in front, the weight of unspoken things between. Finally, he pushed off the railing. "Come on," he said. "I'll walk you home." We fell into step easily, like we always did. But every brush of our sleeves, every accidental nudge, felt loaded now, like we were both aware of something we couldn't put back in the box. When we reached my building, we stopped at the bottom of the steps. The rain had started again, light, but enough to make his hair damp again. I waited for him to say goodnight, to make it casual. Instead, he just stood there, looking at me like he wasn't ready to leave. I almost invited him in. Almost. But instead, I said, "See you tomorrow?" He hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, tomorrow." He started to turn away, then stopped, glanced back. "Adam," his voice was quiet, "I never saw you as just a brother. Not really." And before I could react, he was already walking away into the rain. If you're feeling this moment, subscribe, like, share, and tell me in the comments if someone said that to you. After years of friendship, would you run after them or let them go? The rain hadn't stopped. If anything, it had gotten heavier. It plastered my hair to my forehead, the cold dripping down the back of my neck, seeping under my collar. Noah's figure was already a blur in the distance, shoulders hunched, hands shoved deep into his hoodie pocket. The kind of walk that said, "Don't follow me, but also please do." And I just stood there, frozen on that wet sidewalk, the dim lamplight haloing in the mist between us. People passed, umbrellas brushing past my shoulder, their conversations muffled by the rain, but I couldn't hear a single word. All I heard was my own pulse and the sound of that moment from minutes ago echoing in my head. Why did he look at me like that? It wasn't the usual bro look, not the easy grin or the teasing smirk. It was sharp, almost scared, like he'd just seen something he wasn't supposed to, or maybe he was afraid I'd seen something in him. I want to call his name, to just run after him, shove his shoulder, make some stupid joke to break whatever had settled between us. But my feet wouldn't move. My mouth wouldn't open. And the truth, the one I couldn't admit, was that I was terrified of confirming that what I thought I saw was real. The rain pooled at my shoes, my hoodie weighed heavy with water. Somewhere down the street, Noah turned a corner and was gone. I let the night swallow him. I didn't even know where I was walking. Every block looked the same in the rain. Neon signs bleeding into the puddles, steam curling from subway grates, the occasional taxi horn cutting through the quiet. But my head was full of him, of that moment, of the way his eyes had dropped in my mouth, too quickly for it to be nothing. By the time I looked up, I was standing in front of the little coffee place we always went to after late-night walks. It was closed, chairs stacked on tables, the faint smell of espresso still in the air when I cupped my hands to the glass. I turned away. Noah, I didn't even realize I was running until my chest started to burn. Not the good kind of burn from a game or a gym set. This was sharp, tight, the kind you feel when you're holding back too much. The rain had soaked me through, my hoodie clinging to my back. Every streetlight felt like it was catching me, like the city could see. And I couldn't stop replaying his face when I pulled away, the tiny crease in his forehead, the way his jaw tensed. It was stupid. We'd been here before, late nights, too much closeness. We'd sat shoulder to shoulder on couches, shared headphones, crashed in the same bed when the apartment was too cold in winter. None of that had ever felt like this. I hated that I noticed. I hated that I couldn't stop noticing. When I finally got to my building, I stood in the lobby for a second, dripping onto the floor. The security guy gave me a look, probably because it was nearly 1 a.m., and I looked like I just walked out of a storm, which I had. Upstairs, I shut my door and leaned against it. The apartment was quiet, dark except for the glow from the street. I kicked off my soaked sneakers and peeled off the hoodie, tossing on a chair, but my hands wouldn't stop shaking. What did I just do? What did I just ruin? Back outside, somewhere across the city, Adam was still walking. He didn't know that Noah's hands were shaking. Noah didn't know that Adam's chest felt too tight to breathe. The storm kept falling over New York, each drop sounding like a second ticking away until they'd have to face what had just changed. And neither of them knew, when it happened next, it wouldn't be in the rain. The rain had finally stopped by morning, but the air still carried it. That damp chill that seeps through window frames makes every sound outside seem closer than it is. I'd barely slept, maybe 2 hours at most, and when I rolled over, the gray light coming to the blinds was already sharp enough to make my eyes ache. The first thing I thought about was texting him. The first thing I didn't do was text him. Instead, I made coffee. Too much sugar. Too much staring at the steam. The mug warmed my hands, but did nothing for the knot in my stomach. It wasn't like we had plans, but we always ended up seeing each other. That was the thing about Noah. He was just there, always somehow in my day, whether I planned it or not. And today, the thought of not felt like it was going to tear a hole in me. It was almost noon when my phone buzzed. Not a text, a call. I stared at his name for a full 3 seconds before I picked up. Hey! His voice came, flat at first, then softer. You at the apartment? Yeah. Silence, like he was weighing something. Mind if I swing by? My throat went dry. Sure. He showed up 20 minutes later. The door creaked the same way it always did when I opened it, but somehow the sound felt louder. Noah stood there, hands in the pocket of a clean hoodie, hair still slightly damp from a shower, smelling faintly of whatever cologne he always wore when he was trying to not look like he'd tried. His eyes met mine for a split second before they dropped, not in that casual, what's up way, but like they couldn't stay there without giving something away. You eat yet? He asked. No. Cool. You want to grab something? It was so normal, so easy, and yet I felt like every word between us had a weight under it now. The diner was only a few blocks away, the one with the red vinyl booths and the bell that jingled too loudly when you walked in. We'd sat in the same booth 100 times before. Today it felt smaller. He ordered pancakes. I ordered nothing, then changed my mind and got coffee. We didn't talk about last night. We didn't talk about anything at first. Just the scrape of his fork on the plate, the hum of conversation around us, the occasional sound of rainwater dripping off someone's coat onto the floor. Finally, he set his fork down. Look, about last night. My chest tightened. Yeah. He stopped, looked out the window instead. Forget it. We walked back slower than usual. The sun had pushed through the clouds, making the wet pavement glow, but it didn't feel warm. When we got to my building, he lingered on the sidewalk like he wasn't sure if he was coming up or not. You gonna be around later? He asked. Probably. Cool. A pause. Then he gave this small nod, almost like he was telling himself something, and walked off. I stood there watching him go, again, feeling like I'd just miss a chance to say something I might not get again. Noah, I didn't know why I went. I told myself it was to keep things normal, to show him nothing had changed. But the second I saw his face at the door, I knew I was lying to myself. Everything had changed, and pretending it hadn't was already exhausting. When I walked away from him this time, it felt worse than the night before, because this time I knew he'd let me go. Adam. The city was quieter than usual. Not silent. New York never is. But the sound tonight had a hollow ring to it, like it was carrying through empty spaces instead of bouncing off crowded sidewalks. I'd been pacing my apartment for over an hour. Not for any reason I could admit, even to myself. My phone was on the couch, screen lighting up every now and then with useless notifications. Nothing from him. It was past 11 when the lights flickered. Once. Twice. Then the hum of the refrigerator cut off. The faint buzz of the hallway light disappeared, and the place fell into a soft, unfamiliar darkness. The power was out. I stood there for a second, letting my eyes adjust, the muted glow from the street below spilling in just enough to outline the furniture. Somewhere down the hall, a door shut and footsteps echoed, slow, steady. When I opened my apartment door, the hallway was dim, lit only by the emergency bulbs. And there he was, Noah. He was in a black T-shirt, sleeves pushed up, leaning against the wall with a flashlight in one hand. The beam danced across the floor, catching little flecks of dust in the air. His eyes found mine immediately. You good? Yeah, I said, even though my pulse had just kicked into a sprint. You? Yeah. He glanced toward the stairwell. They're saying it's the whole block. Could be a while. I nodded, but didn't move. Neither did he. Want to come up? He asked finally. It caught me off guard. Up. Rooftop. He shifted the flashlight to his other hand. Better than sitting in the dark. I followed him without thinking. The stairwell was colder than I expected, the concrete walls holding the night air like a breath. Our footsteps echoed, and the small circle of light from his flashlight bounced with each step. When we pushed the rooftop door open, the city spread out beneath us. Dark in patches, glittering in others, clouds low enough to almost touch. The air smelled like rain that hadn't fallen yet. We stood near the edge, looking out. He didn't say anything at first, and I didn't either. You ever notice, he said finally, how quiet it gets when the power's out? Like, everything forgets it's supposed to be making noise. Yeah. I smiled faintly. It's weird. We talked about nothing for a while. The skyline, the smell of someone's leftover takeout drifting from a nearby vent, how the Empire State Building looked almost eerie with half its lights off. But every few seconds, I'd feel his eyes on me, not in that casual way people glance at each other, but longer, warmer, like he was memorizing something he couldn't ask to touch. At one point, the wind picked up and I shivered. Without a word, he took off his hoodie and held it out. I hesitated. You'll get cold. I'll live. His tone was so matter-of-fact. It almost covered the way his fingers brushed mine when I took it. The hoodie smelled like him. Not cologne, not soap, just him. And as much as I tried not to notice, it was the only thing I could breathe in after that. We sat on the ledge, our knees almost touching. The city stretched endlessly ahead, but it felt like all the air was between us. I keep thinking about, I started, then stopped. About what? His voice was low, careful. I shook my head. Nothing. It wasn't nothing. And from the way he looked at me, like he was trying to pull the words out without asking, I think he knew. Noah, the thing about Adam is he never knows when he's giving himself away. That's what drives me insane. Sitting next to him on that ledge, I could feel every small shift of his body. The way his foot would bounce slightly, then stop when he caught himself. The way his hands kept tightening around the sleeves of my hoodie. I wanted to tell him I remembered every second of that night. I wanted to tell him I hadn't stopped replaying it since. But if I did, if I crossed that line, the wind pulled at his hair, and he pushed it back without thinking. His eyes caught the light from some distant building, making them almost glow. You're thinking about it too, aren't you? I said before I could stop myself. His head turned slowly. Thinking about what? I gave him a small smile, the kind you use when you're daring someone to admit something. You know what? He looked away first. We stayed up there for hours, talking, not talking, letting the silence fill in the parts we didn't have the nerve to. When the lights in the building finally flickered back on, neither of us moved right away. It was like the world was telling us to go back to normal, and neither of us was ready. As we headed back down the stairwell, he walked close enough that our shoulders brushed. Once, twice. Each time, I didn't pull away. At his door, he paused with his hand on the knob. Night, he said, like it was the most normal thing in the world. Night, I echoed, but when I closed my own door, I leaned back against it, heart pounding, knowing we were both lying. Adam, it started with rain. Not the gentle, background kind, but the kind that made the city blur into streaks of gray, the kind that felt heavier than it should. I'd been staring at my laptop for an hour, pretending to work. My mind kept replaying the rooftop, the wind in my hair, the weight of his hoodie, the way Noah's eyes had lingered like he was trying to memorize the shape of my thoughts. When my phone buzzed, I didn't even check who it was before answering. Yeah. Stay put. Noah's voice came through, sharp over the static of the rain. You're about to lose power again. I laughed lightly. You psychic now? No, just trust me. 10 minutes later, there was a knock. When I opened the door, he was standing there dripping wet, water sliding from his hair onto the collar of his black t-shirt. He had a duffel bag slung over his shoulder. Your place is higher, he said, brushing past me. Flooding's worse down by mine. Flooding. That explained the bag. But the way he moved, fast, tense, made it clear it wasn't just about the rain. He kicked off his soaked shoes, leaving them by the door. You got towels? I grabbed one from the bathroom and handed it to him, watching him run it over his hair, droplets still clinging to his jaw. Made my throat tighten in a way I didn't want to think about. You staying here tonight? I asked. He shrugged like it was obvious. Unless you kick me out. I won't. The storm outside grew louder. The windows rattled occasionally, and every flicker of lightning turned the room into a brief black and white photograph. Me on the couch, him standing in the kitchen, his damp shirt clinging to his back. He found the breaker flashlight I kept in a drawer and set on the counter. You got enough food if we lose power? I think so. You think so, he repeated, smiling faintly. Guess we'll find out. When the lights did go out, it wasn't as jarring as before. The sound of the rain filled the space, and the faint glow from the flashlight on the counter spilled across the walls. We ended up sitting on the floor, leaning against the couch, a couple of candles between us. The shadows flickered, making him look almost unreal. "You ever think about," he started, then paused. I tilted my head. "About what?" He shook his head. "Nothing." But the way his gaze held mine said otherwise. I let it hang there, unspoken but heavy. The candlelight made it impossible not to notice the way his eyes kept dropping to my hands, to my mouth, then back up. "Noah, I told myself I was here because of the flooding. That's what I'd repeat if anyone asked. But the truth was, the second I saw his building to the sheets of rain, I felt that pull again, the one I'd been ignoring since the night on the rooftop. Now, sitting on his floor with nothing but the storm outside and the flicker of candlelight inside, it was impossible to pretend I didn't notice everything about him. The way he leaned back on his hands, the way his knee brushed mine and didn't move away. "You're quiet," he said finally. "Just thinking." "About?" I hesitated. And in that hesitation, lightning flashed outside, lighting his face for the briefest moment. "About how strange this feels." He frowned. "Strange? Being here, like this." The words hung there, sharper than I meant them to be. I almost took them back. But then he shifted closer, just enough that our arms touched. "What's strange about it?" he asked, voice lower now. I could have told him everything. That it wasn't just this moment that felt strange. It was the way my chest tightened every time he looked at me. The way the space between us felt like it wasn't supposed to exist. Instead, I said, "You know," and for a second, just one, he didn't look away. The rain hammered against the windows. The air between us was thick, heavy. If I leaned forward even slightly, I could, but I didn't, because once you cross that line, you can't go back. Instead, I got up, muttering something about checking my bag. But the whole time, I could feel his eyes on me, like he knew exactly what almost happened. Adam. The rain hadn't let up. If anything, it was worse now, pounding against the windows so hard it felt like the glass might give in. The power had been gone for hours. The candles we lit earlier had burned low. Their wax pooled at the base. The air smelled faintly of rain and melted wax and something warm, faintly like his cologne. Noah was stretched out on the couch, one arm draped over his eyes. The duffel bag sat untouched near the door. "You should sleep," he said, not moving his arm. "You're taking the couch," I reminded him. He shifted, lowering his arm just enough to glance at me. "There's no heat, Adam. Floor's freezing. I've got blankets." He let out a short laugh. "What? You want me to be a frozen corpse in the morning?" "Just," he gestured vaguely. "We'll share." It was casual, the way he said it, but it wasn't. Not to me. We ended up in my bed, not under the same blanket, but close enough that I could feel the dip in the mattress from his weight. The candle on the dresser threw soft light across his face, catching in his hair, making the shadows at the edge of his jaw deeper. He rolled onto his side, facing me. "Still awake?" "Yeah." His eyes searched mine like he was looking for something, or like he was about to say something and stopped himself. The storm outside was relentless, but the silence between us felt louder. Every small movement was amplified. The shift of fabric when he moved, the faint sound of his breathing. My mind kept looping. He's right there. You could just reach out, but I didn't. I turned onto my back, staring at the ceiling. "You ever think about what would happen if the power just never came back?" He chuckled quietly. "You go insane without your laptop." Not wrong. When I glanced back at him, he was still watching me. Not staring, watching, like he was memorizing my face in this light, like this was the only chance he'd get. "Go to sleep, Noah," I murmured. "Yeah," he said, but didn't close his eyes. "Noah, the thing about sleeping next to Adam was you couldn't really sleep, not with the heat of him just inches away, not with the way his hair caught the light, not with the sound of his breathing syncing with mine. I kept my eyes open, even when he turned away. I wanted to see if he'd look back. He didn't. Not until I whispered, "You cold?" He shook his head. "I'm fine." But I pulled the blanket toward him anyway, letting it cover just a little more of his side. His hand brushed mine when he adjusted it. Brief, almost accidental. Almost. Somewhere in the night, the candle died and the room went completely dark. The storm outside became the only sound, steady and heavy. I don't know when I drifted off, but I remember the last thing I felt before sleep was the faintest shift of the mattress, like he'd moved just a little closer. Adam. When I woke, the light in the room was different, soft, gray, muted. Morning. The storm hadn't stopped, but it had shifted. The rain wasn't pounding anymore. It was steady, almost gentle, like the city had taken a long breath. I became aware of two things at once. One, the blanket was pulled over both of us now. Two, Noah's arm was across my waist. It wasn't heavy, just resting there, loose, like it had slipped there by accident. Or maybe not. I stayed still, partly because moving would wake him, and partly because I didn't trust myself to. His breath was warm against the back of my neck. I could feel it every time he exhaled. I told myself it didn't mean anything, that people shifted in their sleep all the time, but my chest was tight in a way I couldn't explain. Outside, the city was muted under rain. Somewhere far off, a car splashed through a puddle. Inside, it was quiet except for our breathing. I almost reached down just to move his arm, but my fingers brushed his wrist instead, and I froze. Noah, I wasn't fully awake. Not yet. Just enough to register that the blanket was warm, that Adam was warm, that my arm was... Yeah, I could have moved it. I could have rolled away. But instead, I shifted my hand just slightly, my fingertips grazing the fabric of his shirt. He didn't pull away. It was dangerous. How easy it was to pretend this was normal, that it wasn't crossing some invisible line. I murmured something, not words, not really, just sound. And maybe that was the excuse to leave my arm where it was. Adam, I should have said something, made a joke, pushed him off. Instead, I closed my eyes again and let the weight of his arm stay. The rain kept falling. Time didn't feel like it was moving at all. And somewhere between awake and asleep, I realized I didn't want it to. Adam. The apartment smelled like coffee and rain. Both scents drifted in from a half-open window, where a fine mist of morning air had slipped past the frame. Noah was at the counter, stirring something in a mug. His hair was damp, not from the shower, but from leaning too far out the window earlier, watching the street like it had something for him. I stood in the doorway, pretending I was deciding whether I wanted coffee, pretending I didn't notice the way his hoodie hung loose at the neck, collarbone visible. He didn't turn when he spoke. Morning. It was casual. Too casual. We hadn't mentioned the arm, the blanket, the way my breath had synced with his without me even realizing it. I told myself it was better that way. Leave it alone, keep the silence sealed. But silence isn't nothing. It's a thing. It takes up space. I grab a mug and pour my own coffee. He stepped aside just enough for me to pass, but not enough to avoid brushing shoulders. Maybe it was an accident. Maybe it wasn't. Raining again, he said, nodding toward the window. Yeah. I sipped my coffee. It was too hot, burned the edge of my tongue, but I didn't react. I was already holding too much inside. The rain outside was steady, making the street look blurred through the glass. Drops gathered at the fire escape before falling into the puddle below. A taxi hissed past, tires slicing through water. Noah leaned against the counter, arms crossed now, his mug in one hand. I need to run an errand before noon. What kind of errand? Hardware store. I left my drill at my brother's place. Need a new one. I shrugged. Okay. He tilted his head toward the door. Come with me? It wasn't a question. He never asked like other people did. It was always a statement, like he already knew my answer. And I did go. Noah, we didn't talk much on the way. Partly because the rain made the kind of background noise that didn't need filling. Partly because I was busy pretending last night didn't happen. I kept thinking about the way he'd stayed still. The way he'd let me stay there, arm across him, like it was the most natural thing in the world. If he'd moved away, maybe I could have chalked it up to sleep. But he didn't. The hardware store was a 15-minute walk. 10 if we didn't stop at the corner bodega. We stopped. It was cramped inside, warm from the space heater by the register. The smell of wet coats and ground coffee filled the air. Adam picked up a bag of chips and flipped it over, reading the ingredients like it mattered. I paid for a bottle of water and stood by the door, watching the rain pick up again. Adam, when we stepped back outside, the wind had shifted. My hood wasn't enough. The rain angled straight at my face. Noah popped open an umbrella, one of those small, cheap ones from a street vendor, big enough for one person, if they didn't mind getting a little wet. He didn't say anything, just slowed his pace so I could step under it too. We were close, closer than before. His jacket brushed my arm with every step. The rhythm of our feet matched without us trying. The sound of rain on the umbrella made a thin, fragile roof over us. At one point, someone rushed past, and Noah's hand came up, not quite on my back, but close enough that I could feel the heat through my shirt. We reached the hardware store, but they were closed for inventory. A handwritten sign taped to the glass. Guess that's it, Noah said, glancing at me. Unless you want to grab coffee somewhere. I nodded. The cafe we ducked into was half empty, smelling like cinnamon and espresso. Soft jazz played in the background. We took a table in the back, near the rain-streaked window. Noah, we didn't talk much while waiting for our drinks. Just watched the rain beat up on the glass. When the coffee came, Adam wrapped his hands around the mug like it was cold in here. Maybe it was. I found myself watching his fingers, the way he tapped one against the ceramic, slow and rhythmic. Last night, I said without thinking. He looked up. I instantly regretted it. But now that the words were in the air, I couldn't take them back. I took a sip buying time. You didn't move away. Adam, I didn't answer right away, because I didn't know how to. My mind split into two tracks. One trying to come up with something casual, the other fighting the urge to just admit I didn't want to. It was warm, I said finally. Noah's mouth curved like he almost smiled. Yeah, he said softly. We didn't break eye contact. Not for a few seconds too long. And that was a slip. Not a touch. Not a word. Just holding that look, like we'd both agreed to stop pretending for a breath. Noah, I should have looked away first. Should have made some dumb joke. But I didn't. When I did finally look down at my coffee, my pulse was too fast. I could feel it in my fingertips. We finished our drinks without saying much. When we stepped back into the rain, the umbrella felt smaller somehow. Adam, we walked in silence most of the way back. But just before we reached my building, Noah glanced at me, and for a split second, his face was completely open. No guarded expression. No casual front. Just something raw, unfiltered, like he'd been caught mid-thought. Then it was gone. He turned his gaze away, shoved his free hand into his pocket, and said, "See you upstairs." The rain swallowed the rest of the moment, but it didn't erase it. Adam, the rain didn't stop. Not by afternoon. Not by evening. By night. The city was a watercolor of blurred lights and streaming windows. Everything outside seemed softened, except the sound. Rain hammered the roof, rattled the fire escape, hissed against the street. I'd been pacing my apartment for an hour, restless. Noah's music was bleeding through the wall. Low bass, then a guitar riff I almost recognized. Around 9, my phone buzzed. Noah, power's out in my kitchen. Breaker's fine. You got light? I glanced at my ceiling. My lights were fine. Adam, yeah. Noah, can I come over for a sec? A few minutes later, there was a knock. He stood there in a hoodie, hood down, hair damp from rain. In his hand was a flashlight, but it was off. "It's just my kitchen," he said. "Rest of the place is fine. Guess the circuit's dead. Or maybe the rain." "Come in," I said before he finished. Noah, the warmth hit me first. Adam's place was always warmer than mine. His heat kicked in faster. I stepped inside, pulling the door shut behind me, and that faint smell, coffee, laundry detergent, something else I could never name, wrapped around me. He had one lamp on in the corner, and the rain outside made shadows move across the walls. "Breaker's fine," I repeated, Like maybe saying it twice would make it less stupid that I couldn't fix it. Adam leaned against the arm of the couch. "You hungry?" I almost said no. Almost. But the truth was, I'd barely eaten since lunch. Yeah. We ended up in his kitchen, digging through cupboards. Adam found instant ramen, tossed 2 packs on the counter. While the water boiled, we just talked. Not about last night. Not about the cafe. Not about the look we'd held for too long. Stupid stuff. Weather. A show we both half-watched last year. It felt normal. Almost. Adam. The ramen was steaming in 2 mismatched bowls when the storm made itself known again. A deep rumble, then a sharp crack. And just like that, my lights went out. Total darkness. Except for the faint glow from the window and the tiny beam from Noah's flashlight when he flicked it on. Well, I said, "Guess we're even now." We took the bowls to the living room. Flashlight propped on the coffee table. Beam angled up so it lit the ceiling and gave us enough to see by. The sound of rain filled every gap in the conversation. "Noah." Halfway through my bowl, I noticed the way the flashlight made Adam's face look different. Softer in some places, sharper in others. I caught myself staring. Not long, just enough to feel it. He didn't notice, or pretended not to. When we were done, we just stayed there, not rushing to clean up, not moving to check our phones. It was a storm. That's what I told myself. It pinned us here, made the night feel slower, heavier. "Adam, your place gonna be freezing without the kitchen heat?" I asked after a while. "It's fine," he said, but there was no conviction in his voice. "You can stay here," I said. It came out more direct than I expected. He looked at me for a beat. Then he said, "Okay." I tossed him a blanket from the closet. He sat at the far end of the couch at first, legs stretched out, ankles crossed. I took the other end. But sometime after midnight, after more stupid conversation, after both bowls had been rinsed and left in the sink, we weren't at opposite ends anymore. "Noah." It wasn't planned. I didn't even realize I'd shifted closer until my knee almost touched his. He didn't move away. We were both half under the blanket now, and the flashlight had died an hour ago, leaving only the soft gray light from the street lamps outside. I could hear his breathing. Slow. Steady. Mine wasn't. "Adam." There's a kind of silence that isn't empty. The air felt full, heavy, but not uncomfortable, like a pause right before music starts. Noah shifted again, this time enough that his thigh brushed mine. Just a light touch. It stayed. I told myself to ignore it. I didn't. "Noah." I don't know if it was a storm in the dark or just everything from the past week finally tipping over, but I turned my head. He was looking at me, not in that casual, friends having a conversation way. Not like we used to. This was different, and I didn't look away. "Adam." It would have been easy to break the moment, say something dumb, shift my legs, pretend I was getting up for water, but I didn't. The distance between us wasn't much. Maybe a foot, then maybe half that. I'm not even sure who leaned in first. "Noah." We didn't kiss. That's the thing. People think the first moment is about lips touching. Sometimes it's about being so close that your breath mixes, your foreheads almost brush, and the rest of the world is gone. We stayed there, close enough that one wrong move would tip it over the edge. And for a second, I wanted that wrong move more than anything. "Adam." The power came back before either of us moved. The lamp blinked on. The hum of the fridge returned. We both leaned back at the same time. He looked down at his hands. I stood and said I'd grab more water. It was the safest thing I could do, but nothing felt safe anymore. "Noah." I woke up before the alarm. Not from noise. The rain had stopped sometime in the early hours, but from that uneasy weight in my chest, that half-memory feeling. The blanket was still over me. My neck ached from the couch, and the air had that faint morning chill. Adam wasn't there. For a second, my brain told me last night hadn't happened, that I just crashed here because of the blackout, eaten ramen, talked until late. But then I remembered the blanket shared between us, the almost touch, the look, the space between our faces. It felt so small and so loud. I sat up, running a hand through my hair. His apartment was quiet except for the low hum of the fridge and the occasional car passing outside. The kitchen light was on. Adam! I heard him stir before I saw him. I'd been standing at the counter for 20 minutes, staring at the same coffee mug, wondering why it felt like making coffee required preparation. I'd almost left before he woke. Almost mumbled some excuse about grabbing groceries or meeting someone. But I didn't want to make it look like I was avoiding him, even if I was. When he came in, he looked like he hadn't decided how to move yet, like he was still in the moment from last night, but wasn't sure which version of it I'd kept. Coffee. I asked. He nodded. Noah. The smell hit me before I answered. Strong, dark roast. I leaned against the doorway while he poured 2 mugs. Thanks, I said, my voice rough from sleep. We didn't sit at the table. We didn't sit on the couch either. Just stood in the kitchen, him leaning on the counter, me holding the mug with both hands. It was stupid, the way my chest tightened every time his eyes flicked up to mine, like I was waiting for him to say something about last night. But he didn't. Adam. I thought about asking if he slept okay. Safe question. Neutral. Instead, I heard myself say, "You almost stayed closer than that." It was out before I could pull it back. Noah. I froze. It wasn't a joke. His tone was too even, too deliberate, like he was testing the air between us. I should have laughed it off, said something about the couch being cramped, about sharing warmth in the blackout. But the words that came out were, "You didn't move away." Adam. Silence. Not awkward, just waited. He was watching me like he wanted to see if I'd deny it. I didn't, I said. The second those 2 words left my mouth, the air changed. Noah. My fingers tightened around the mug. You didn't, I repeated, softer. We weren't talking about the couch anymore. Adam. I took a slow sip of coffee, partly to buy time. The smart thing would be to steer this back to safe ground. Pretend we were just teasing each other. But there was this pull, the same one I'd felt last night in the dark when our knees brushed. So I didn't steer away. I said again. Noah. Something shifted in my chest. It wasn't confession. Not exactly. But it was enough to make me want to step forward. I didn't. I just held his gaze a second longer than I should have. The coffee was cooling in my hands, untouched. Adam. We didn't talk about it again. Not that morning. I made eggs. He washed the mugs. We traded a couple of comments about the weather clearing. But everything under it, the unspoken part, was still there, running beneath every movement. By the time he left, the sky had turned sharp blue, like the storm had been erased. It hadn't. Not for me. Noah. The walk back to my place felt longer than it should have. Inside, my kitchen was still dark. The circuit hadn't magically fixed itself overnight. But I didn't care. I kept replaying his voice. I didn't. Like it was the simplest thing in the world to admit. I should have felt relieved. I should have been able to box it up in my head, label it, move on. Instead, all I could think was, what happens the next time we're that close? Adam. That week, I caught myself checking my phone more than usual. Not because I was waiting for a text, because I was deciding whether to send one. I didn't want to force anything. Didn't want to break whatever balance we had. But I also didn't want to pretend the balance hadn't shifted. When Friday rolled around, he texted first. Noah, your kitchen light working? Noah. It was an excuse. Obviously. I could have called an electrician. Could have fixed it myself with a trip to the hardware store. But the truth was, I wanted to be in his kitchen again. Not the couch. Not yet. Adam. I told him to come by. Told him I had an old bulb that might fit. When he showed up, the late afternoon sun was pouring into the apartment, catching in his hair. We didn't talk about last week. We just stood there, close enough that when I reached past him to grab the toolbox, my arm brushed his. He didn't move away. Adam. The toolbox wasn't heavy. It wasn't awkward to carry. And yet, my hands felt clumsy, maybe because Noah was standing too close to the counter. And the only way to set it down was to angle around him, close enough that I could smell the faint mix of rain on denim and whatever soap he used. You still got that ladder? I asked, In my hall closet, he said. But I thought maybe you just, fix it like this. Like what? With magic, he said, smirking, but his voice was softer than the words deserved. Noah. He popped the old bulb out of its socket with ease, inspecting the base like he was judging whether it deserved to be replaced. You been living in the dark all week? He asked. Not totally, I said, leaning back against the opposite counter. I've got the lamp in the living room. Besides, I kind of like it dim. Dim is one thing, he said, glancing at me. Pitch black kitchen? That's depressing. I grinned. Guess I'll just have to keep hanging out in your kitchen instead. The words came out before I thought about them. Before I remembered that kitchens were now loaded territory. That the last time we stood in one together, he'd said I didn't. Adam. I caught it. The slip, the way his eyes darted away after. And I wanted to push it, just enough to see if he'd hold my gaze. You saying you've been using this light situation as an excuse? His lips curved, slow. Maybe. There was a beat, the kind that stretches because neither person wants to move. Noah. He still had the bulb in his hand, but he wasn't looking at it anymore. The sunlight through the window caught on the curve of his jaw, the faint scruff he hadn't shaved. I wanted to trace it with my eyes until the rest of the room disappeared. Instead, I cleared my throat. You gonna fix it or just stand there accusing me of ulterior motives? He chuckled low. I'm fixing it. Adam. I wasn't. Not right away. I turned toward the ladder, but before I moved, my shoulder brushes again, lightly enough that it could be nothing, deliberately enough that it wasn't. He didn't shift away. I told myself to just change the bulb, to climb the ladder, screw it in, flip the switch, and leave. But every time I reached the first rung, my mind kept circling back to that couch, the dark, the fact that I hadn't moved away. Noah. The ladder wobbled slightly when he stepped onto it, and I steadied it with my hand. Don't fall, I said, looking up at him. His mouth quirked. You catching me if I do? Guess you'll have to find out. It was banter, the kind we'd had before, but this time, something in his eyes lingered a beat too long before he turned back to the light fixture. Adam. The bulb clicked into place with a twist. I didn't flick the switch right away. Just stayed there, half turned toward him, feeling the heat of his hand still on the ladder. Finally, I stepped down. The kitchen lit up in a warm wash when I hit the switch. Better? I asked. He nodded. Better. But neither of us moved. Noah. It was stupid. How much the new light made him look different. Like I could see him more clearly than I had all week, and that alone made it harder to breathe. You want coffee? I asked. Yeah, he said, though his voice was quieter than before. We both reached for the coffee tin at the same time. Our fingers brushed. And for the first time since that night, neither of us pulled back. Adam. The contact was nothing. A second, maybe two, but it felt like holding my breath underwater and realizing I didn't have to come up yet. I should have stepped away. Instead, I let my hand rest there, over his, until I saw his grip tighten just slightly. That's when I knew he wasn't going to be the one to move first. Noah. The coffee tin was still between us. I started but didn't finish. He didn't say anything either. Just looked at me with that same unreadable calm he'd had on the couch, like he was weighing the risk of closing that last inch of space. I didn't move. Didn't give him permission. Didn't take it away either. Adam. I let go first of the tin, not of the moment. He poured the grounds into the filter, and I stood too close behind him, pretending to reach for mugs. When my arm brushed his back, he didn't flinch. Noah. The coffee brewed slow, painfully slow. By the time we sat at the table, it felt like the air in the kitchen had thickened. We talked about nothing. The storm cleanup, the neighbor's cat, the grocery store finally restocking bread. But under every word was that undercurrent, stronger now than it had ever been. Halfway through his cup, he said it. You didn't move away either. Adam. It wasn't planned. The words had been there all week, circling, and once they were out, I didn't want to take them back. Noah. My throat tightened. I could have denied it, could have made it a joke, but I didn't. No, I said quietly. I didn't. Adam. The table between us suddenly felt optional. I didn't lean across it. Not yet. But I knew, and from the way his eyes held mine, he knew too, that the next time we were in the same room, one of us wasn't going to stop. The rain had been falling for hours, the kind of steady, silver curtain that made the city look softer than it really was and lonelier. Streetlights glowed in small halos, their light bending and shivering through raindrops on the glass. I'd been staring at those halos for what felt like forever, the hum of the radiator barely keeping my apartment from feeling cold. It was close to midnight when my phone buzzed. "Noah, you up?" 2 words. Just 2, but they pulled something in me tight. I typed back before I could think too hard. "Yeah, you okay?" No reply for a minute. Then, "Can I come over?" And there it was, that quiet ache I'd been living with for months, the one that woke up every time he stepped into my space. My hand hesitated over the keyboard. I almost typed "why," like it mattered, but instead I sent, "Yeah, door's unlocked." When the knock came 10 minutes later, it wasn't because he didn't trust me. It was because Noah always gave me the choice to open the door, always gave me a second to breathe before he walked into my air. I opened it to find him standing there in the rain, hood down, hair soaked dark and sticking to his forehead. His jacket clung to him, water dripping off the hem. "Hey," he said, voice rough. I stepped aside. "Get in before you freeze." The door clicked shut behind him. His footsteps were quiet against the hardwood as he peeled off the jacket, shaking out droplets. I could smell the rain on him, clean, sharp, like metal and winter air. I went to grab him a towel, but when I came back, he was still standing in the middle of the living room, like he wasn't sure what to do with himself. "Here," I said, holding it out. His fingers brushed mine when he took it, and I swear it was nothing, just skin against skin. But it wasn't nothing, not to me. He dried his hair slowly, eyes flicking toward me every so often, like he was weighing something. The air between us was different tonight, tighter, edged. "What's going on, Noah?" I finally asked. He didn't answer right away. Tossed the towel onto the couch, crossed his arms. "I don't know. I just couldn't stay in my place tonight." "You could have gone anywhere." "Yeah." His eyes held mine. "But I came here." I swallowed. "Why?" A long pause. He looked away, toward the window, where rain streaked down the glass in shimmering lines. You ever feel like you're trying to outrun something, but no matter where you go, it's still there? "Every day," I said, and it slipped out before I could stop it. That got his attention. He studied me for a beat, something shifting in his face. "Yeah, I thought so." We stood there in the low lamplight, the radiator humming, the rain steady outside. I should have said something to cut the tension, to make it easier, but I didn't. Neither did he. Instead, Noah walked past me into the kitchen, opening cabinets like he lived here. "You got coffee?" "Always," I said. "Good." He filled the kettle, moving slow, like he was buying himself time. I leaned against the doorway, watching the curve of his shoulders under the thin hoodie he'd put on under the jacket, watching the way he kept his focus on small, meaningless tasks. Finally, I said it, the thing that had been crawling under my skin for weeks. "We can't keep doing this." He froze mid-motion, spoon in hand. "Doing what?" "This," I said, my voice quieter than I meant to be. "You showing up at midnight. Me letting you in, acting like nothing's different." Noah set the spoon down very gently, like he was afraid of breaking something. "Maybe nothing is different." "Don't do that." "Do what?" "Pretend you don't feel it." His jaw tightened. "And what if I do?" The words hit harder than they should have, maybe because I'd spent so long convincing myself I'd imagined everything. The kettle began to hiss softly. I stepped into the kitchen, close enough to smell the rain still clinging to his clothes. "Then you need to say it." He turned, meeting my eyes, and for the first time in months, he didn't look away. "And if I do, what happens to us?" I didn't have an answer, not one I could say out loud. Because the truth was, if he said it, nothing would ever go back to what it was. And maybe I wanted that. Maybe I was terrified of it. The kettle whistled, breaking the moment. Noah moved first, pouring the water over the coffee grounds, his hand steady even though his breathing wasn't. We sat on the couch with our mugs, the steam curling up between us. "You ever think," he said quietly, "that maybe we were supposed to find each other for a reason?" "All the time," I admitted. He nodded, staring into his cup. "Yeah, me too." The rain got heavier outside, drumming against the windows. Somewhere far below, a car horn blared, then faded into the night. And then, without looking up, he said, "I don't see you like a brother, Adam." My chest went tight. "Then how do you see me?" He looked up then, and the way his eyes held mine, steady and unflinching, made every answer I'd imagined seem too small for what was in the air between us. I didn't move. Neither did he. The clock on the wall ticked, the sound loud and quiet. I could see it in him, the pull, the hesitation, the same war I was fighting. And for a heartbeat, I thought he'd close the space between us. Instead, he set his mug down, stood up, and said, "If I stay any longer tonight, I'm not going to leave." And just like that, he walked to the door. My voice felt stuck in my throat, but I forced it out. "Noah." He paused with his hand on the doorknob, not turning. "Good night, Adam." The door closed softly behind him. I sat there for a long time, staring at the rain-streaked window, heart pounding, knowing that nothing about tonight had actually ended. It had only just started. The rain didn't let up. I stayed on the couch long after Noah left. Coffee cooling in my hands, my apartment thick with the weight of what he'd said. The city outside blurred behind streaks of water, its light smeared gold and red across the glass. I could still hear his voice in my head. "I don't see you like a brother, Adam." The words, it felt like someone had opened a door in a house I'd been trapped in for years, and then shut it before I could step through. I tried to watch something, anything, but every sound felt too loud, too wrong. At some point I gave up, turned the TV off, and just sat there listening to the radiator hum. By the time I checked the clock, it was past 2. Sleep wasn't happening, not with him still in my head. At 3, I caved. I grabbed my jacket, didn't even bother with an umbrella. The cold hit me as soon as I stepped outside. Sharp, soaking through my clothes in seconds. My sneakers splashed through shallow puddles as I headed east, toward the one place I knew he'd be if he wasn't home. The streets were nearly empty at this hour, just the occasional cab hissing past on wet asphalt. My breath came out in pale clouds. It took 10 minutes to get there, the all-night laundromat near 9th. Noah had told me once he liked the place because nobody bothered him there after midnight. Sure enough, through the foggy glass, I saw him, sitting on one of the hard plastic chairs, hood up, elbows on his knees. A dryer tumbled lazily beside him, the rhythmic thump of clothes inside almost hypnotic. I pushed the door open. The bell above it gave a tired little ring. He looked up, surprised. "Adam." I shut the door behind me, shaking water from my sleeves. "You forgot something." His brow furrowed. "What?" I stepped closer. "You forgot to finish your sentence." For a second, I thought he'd play dumb. Thought he'd lean back, smirk, make a joke to push me away. But he didn't. He just watched me, his eyes darker under the hood's shadow. "Why'd you come here?" he asked. "You know why." The dryer kept turning. The rain outside kept falling. Finally, he pulled the hood back, running a hand through his damp hair. "You shouldn't be here." "Too late." He shook his head, half smiling but without humor. "You always do this." "Do what?" "Show up when I'm trying to keep my distance." "Then stop trying," I said before I could think. His mouth twitched, like he was about to argue, but something in my tone must have gotten to him. He leaned back in the chair, studying me. "You really want me to say it, Adam?" "Yes." He exhaled slowly, looking away like the words were heavier than they should be. "You've been in my head for months. I can't turn it off. I've tried." My chest tightened. "So have I." He laughed, but it was soft and tired. "God, we're idiots." "Probably." We didn't move for a while, just sat in the hum and warmth of the laundromat, while the rain kept trying to wash the city away. When the dryer buzzed, he stood, pulling his clothes out in a rush, stuffing them into a duffel. "Come on, let's get out of here." We ended up walking without saying much. The rain had slowed to a mist, the streets slick and shining. Our steps echoed in the quiet. He stopped under a street lamp, light pooling around him in soft gold. If we keep going down this road, there's no turning back. I stepped into the light with him. I don't want to turn back. The silence after that was different, not tense, not hesitant, just inevitable. Noah's eyes searched mine for a long moment. Then he nodded, like he'd made peace with something. Okay, he said. It wasn't a confession, not in the way I'd pictured it, but it was more than enough. We kept walking. When we reached my building, he didn't hesitate this time. Follow me up the stairs, water dripping from our clothes onto the worn steps. Inside, the air was warm, almost too warm after the cold outside. I hung my jacket, turned to find him standing just inside the door, looking around like he was memorizing it. Noah, I started, but he cut me off. Don't say anything, he said, his voice low, and then he closed the space between us. It wasn't rushed, wasn't messy, just a slow, deliberate step forward until there was nowhere left to go. His hand came up, fingers brushing my jaw, and I swear my heart stopped for a second. We didn't kiss. Not yet. But in that breathless, charged moment, I knew it was going to happen. Maybe not tonight. Maybe not tomorrow. But soon. And when it did, there'd be no pretending we hadn't both been walking toward it all along. If you're feeling this moment, subscribe, like, share, and tell me in the comments when two people know it's inevitable, is waiting strength or fear? The night didn't end the way I thought it would. Noah stayed, not close enough to touch, but close enough that the air between us stayed charged. We sat on opposite ends of the couch, knees bent toward each other, talking about nothing that mattered and everything that did. We didn't bring up the laundromat, didn't say the word inevitable, but every pause, every glance felt like a silent acknowledgement. It was after 4 when his head finally tipped back against the couch cushion, his eyes slipping shut. You can crash here, I said quietly. He didn't open his eyes. I know. I stood, grabbed a blanket from the hall closet, and draped it over him. His shoulders shifted under the weight, but he didn't look at me. I lingered for a second, maybe too long, then turned toward my bedroom. I'd almost reached the doorway when his voice stopped me. Adam! I looked back. His eyes were still closed, but his voice was steady. Don't change your mind in the morning. I didn't answer, not because I didn't know what to say, but because I didn't trust my voice not to crack. The morning came slow and gray. The rain had stopped, but the clouds outside were heavy, pressing against the windows. I padded into the living room to find the blanket, folded neatly on the couch. Noah was gone. For a second, my stomach dropped, but then I saw the note. Had to go. Call me when you're up. N. I set it on the counter, staring at it longer than I should have. The next few days blurred. We saw each other, but not like before. No late-night drives. No hours sitting in silence just to be near each other. It was almost worse than distance. We were circling something, both afraid to land. Then, on Friday, he called. Meet me tonight, he said, no explanation. Where? You'll see. It was colder that night. The kind of sharp air that hinted winter wasn't far off. I found him waiting by his car, leaning against the driver's side, hands shoved deep in his jacket pockets. Where are we going? I asked. You'll see, he repeated, with that small, knowing smirk that made my chest tighten. We drove for almost an hour, the city lights fading behind us, replaced by dark stretches of road lined with bare trees. I didn't ask questions, partly because I trusted him, partly because I didn't want to break whatever spell was in the air. Finally, he turned onto a narrow dirt road, the tires crunching over gravel. When we stopped, I realized where we were, the edge of a frozen lake, the water still dark and unfrozen in the middle, but rimmed with a thin sheet of ice. He killed the engine. Silence rushed in. I used to come here when I needed to think, he said. Haven't been in years. I shoved my hands in my pockets, stepping closer to the lake's edge. Why bring me here? He joined me, his breath clouding in the cold. Because I want you to see where my head's been. I glanced at him. And where's that? He hesitated, looking out over the dark water, somewhere between wanting to keep you safe and wanting to stop pretending I don't think about you every day. The words hung there, heavier than the night air. I didn't look away, then stop pretending. He turned to face me fully. The space between us was small, and this time, neither of us moved back. For a long moment, it was just his eyes on mine, the soft sound of water lapping at the icy shore. Then he stepped closer, close enough that I felt his warmth through the cold. His hand found my arm, sliding down slowly until our fingers almost touched. But again, he didn't close the distance completely. Instead, he whispered, "Not yet." I swallowed, my pulse loud in my ears. "How much longer?" He gave a small, almost pained smile. "Until we're both sure it's not just a moment talking." I wanted to argue, wanted to tell him I'd been sure for months. But there was something in his voice, quiet, certain, that made me hold back. We didn't kiss. Again. But when we left, walking back toward the car, he reached for my hand. Just took it, like it was the most natural thing in the world. And this time, I didn't let go. We drove back with the windows fogged and the heater humming, our joined hands resting on the console between us. No music, no words, just a quiet, steady rhythm of shared breath. By the time he dropped me off, the sky was pale with the first hints of dawn. "Next week," he said as I opened the door. "What's next week?" He smiled faintly. "When I stop making you wait." And then he was gone. The days leading up to next week felt like a slow climb to something I couldn't name. Every text, every glance we stole when we saw each other, carried a weight that only got heavier. It was torture, but it was also electric. The night finally came. The rain had stopped hours ago, but the streets still glistened the way they do when the city exhales after a storm. Somewhere down the block, a cab hissed past, tires cutting through a shallow pool of water, sending ripples out into the night. I could hear them. The ripples, faint, delicate, almost like they belonged to another place, another world, a world where maybe this wasn't so hard. Noah was ahead of me, hands jammed into the pockets of his coat, shoulders hunched. Not from the cold. It wasn't cold tonight, but from the weight of something else. Something we'd both been carrying for so damn long. I followed, not saying a word. It felt like if I did, the wrong sound might splinter this fragile in-between moment we were trapped in. We stopped at the corner. The little bodega with the flickering neon open sign was still lit, humming softly. The owner leaned lazily against the counter inside, scrolling through his phone. The smell of warm bread drifted out every time the door opened. Noah didn't go in. He just stood there, staring at the glass, at the shelves of chips and gum and cheap coffee machines, like he was seeing something I couldn't. Or maybe like he was trying not to see me. I finally stepped closer, close enough to hear his uneven breathing, close enough to feel the faint tremor in my own chest. "Why did you stop?" I asked, my voice softer than I meant it to be. His eyes flickered, not at me, but at the rain-slick reflection in the glass. And then he said, barely audible, "I can't keep doing this, Adam." The words hit harder than they should have, but I stayed quiet. I didn't want to interrupt whatever storm was brewing inside him. "I can't," he continued, swallowing hard, "pretend you're just my friend anymore." The world seemed to slow. The bodega hum, the faint hiss of a passing car. Even my heartbeat, all of it, slowed. And in that stillness, I saw his reflection finally turn toward mine. Our eyes met through glass. And God, the things I saw there, fear, longing, relief, like he'd been standing at the edge of this cliff for years and had finally decided to jump. I stepped forward, closing the last space between us until the faint warmth of his arm brushed mine. My voice was barely above a whisper, then stopped pretending. His breath caught, and then, like something in him gave way, Noah turned toward me fully, his face open in a way I'd never seen before. "You don't get it," he said, voice breaking. "I thought you were like my brother. I told myself that every damn day. And then that night happened, And He stopped, shaking his head, eyes closing as if the memory was too much. Adam, I can't stop thinking about it. I can't stop thinking about you. There it was. The words I've been aching for and terrified of. For a long moment, we just stood there, letting them settle between us, not rushing to fill the silence, not trying to make it smaller. And then I stepped closer, just enough that my hand could find his, fingers brushing first, then curling in, slow, deliberate, like we were both afraid the other might pull away. He didn't. He gripped back, tight, almost desperate. We didn't kiss right there in the street. We didn't need to, because in that moment, that hand in mine felt louder than anything I'd ever heard. Later in my apartment, the city lights spilling gold and blue through the blinds, we sat on the floor, leaning against the couch. There were no neon signs here, no strangers walking past, just us and the hum of the fridge in the kitchen. Noah had kicked his shoes off, pulled his knees up, and was just watching me, not staring, not in that heavy way, but in the way you look at something you've been away from for too long. I don't know how to do this, he admitted, voice low. And for once, I didn't have an answer. So I just reached out, resting my hand on his knee. You don't have to know, I said. We'll figure it out. He exhaled long, shaky. And then, almost without thinking, he leaned his head against my shoulder. It felt like the most natural thing in the world. Like maybe this is where we'd been heading all along. I closed my eyes, letting the moment sink in. The weight of him, the warmth, the quiet, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was holding my breath. We didn't talk about the future that night. We didn't talk about labels or rules or what it would mean to everyone else. We just sat there, letting the city hum around us, letting the walls we'd built finally crumble. When Noah finally lifted his head, his eyes searched mine, not for permission, not for answers, just for truth. And I gave it to him, in the way I leaned in the way our foreheads touched, in the way we finally closed the gap that had haunted us for so long. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't fireworks. It was steady, earned, like the first breath after surfacing from deep water. When we pulled back, I smiled, small, quiet, but real. Wouldn't it be okay? I said, and he smiled back, that rare, unguarded one I'd only seen a handful of times. Yeah, we are. The city outside kept moving, unaware of the shift that had just happened inside my apartment. But for us, time slowed. And for the first time, the space between us wasn't filled with tension or fear or what-ifs. Just peace. And the knowledge that whatever came next, we'd face it together. The weeks after felt strange. Not because everything had changed, but because so much hadn't. We still met at the same coffee shop on Wednesday mornings. Still argued over which subway car was a lucky one. Still sat on my couch after long days, letting the hum of the city fill the gaps in our conversation. But now there was no pretending, no careful distance. His hand would find mine without hesitation. My shoulder had a new habit of catching his head when the night got late. It was a Sunday morning, the kind where the city feels like it's moving in slow motion. Rain tapping soft against the window. The smell of coffee drifting from the kitchen. Noah was curled up on my couch, wearing one of my hoodies. Hood up, sleeves pushed halfway to his elbows. His eyes were on a book, but every so often I'd catch him glancing at me. Not in that searching way he used to, but in that quiet I'm here way. I made us pancakes, badly, and he laughed when I dropped one on the floor. Then he kissed me. Just kissed me. Like it was the most natural thing in the world. And maybe it was. Later, we walked to the river. The air was cool, sharp with the scent of wet stone and drifting leaves. We leaned on the railing, side by side, watching the sunlight break through the clouds and scatter across the water. He slipped his hand into mine without looking. I tightened my grip without thinking. Neither of us said it out loud, but I think we both knew. Whatever storms were waiting ahead, we'd weather them, together. If you're feeling this moment, subscribe, like, share, and tell me in the comments, what's the one small gesture that makes you feel safe with someone?